What is education, and why is education important? Is it important? After all, what's the real purpose of getting educated about anything? We so frequently take education and the process for learning in general totally for granted. Not only that, but the ways in which we think. How we've gone about structuring our own consciousness itself has largely remained unchanged for a long, long time. So how do we literally change our minds? Can we reconfigure our own ways of thinking? And if so, how? Join Dr. Joseph Atman, the founder of one of the world's most revolutionary educational centers, Middletree, and award-winning broadcaster Tammy Trujillo for Educate Everyone, and explore the mysteries of our own consciousness and the education we implement in order for it to be what it is.
And on this episode of Educate Everyone, we want to talk about not just getting the education, but what do you do with it? And we're going to talk about getting out into the job market, because that's why we go to college, right? That's why we get an education, so we can have a future. Our guest, she knows all about this. She is a certified HR professional. Ricklyn Woods is joining us, and she has a long association with Middletree. And Ricklyn, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We're excited, too, because, Joe, you guys go back a ways.
We do.
Miss Ricklyn worked with us as our Director of People and Culture, did some really amazing things here, and especially was a great influence on me, and still is, in terms of how I kind of think about making sure that we have the kind of culture that we do. And she sort of also helped bring me up and along on the path of CEO dumb, and got me to think about, like, what is a CEO? What should a CEO be doing? We were each other's Secret Santas one year, and she gave me a bunch of books. What do they call it, Miss Ricklyn? Bibliophile?
Yes.
Where you collect books. You don't always read them all, but you just collect a lot of them.
Well, it's nice to have a good shelf of books for when you want to read one. You have one. I've got one, too.
And it looks good on your Zoom calls and everything.
No kidding, right? Especially if you organize them nicely on the shelf. There's a lot to talk about how you organize your books. Alphabetical, by color, by size. But yeah, you're right. They make a great backdrop. Ricklyn, tell us about you. Give us a little of your background.
All right. Well, I have been in human resources. This is my 19th year. I grew up in the industry, started off quite entry level and worked my way up. My background is quite unique because I took a kind of a segue or hiatus from HR around the pandemic, and I left my HR role and joined University of Phoenix as a career advisor. I had kind of reached a point where I was, just during the pandemic feeling a little bit overwhelmed with everything that was happening. And I was like, what do I really love the most about HR? And it really is the career development piece and helping people. So I joined my alma mater, University of Phoenix, and spent 2 years as a career advisor before jumping back into HR when I joined Middletree as Director of People and Culture. And I also spent a year teaching as an adjunct faculty member at one of the California community colleges. So I have quite the blend of HR and academics and being an educator. And so I think I have some really good perspective to share on the topic we're going to talk about today.
What causes the passion? What fires that up in you?
You know what? I've been a lifelong learner myself, and I was a non-traditional college student. I completed my degree at 39 years old, my bachelor's degree, and then a master's right after that. And prior to, I was getting every certification I can think of so that I could move up in my career. And so I've just always been a learner and approached my career quite strategically. And so I want to help others do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And when Miss Ricklyn gets into something, I mean, she knows about it, right? That she studies up on it, she researches it, she understands it, she can explain it to you like she invented it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I think that is an incredible
yeah.
quality, and that's a quality often. Seriously, I don't see so much in my college students about really researching and digging and finding everything out. I think that is one of the most important qualities in a person, if for no other reason, just for their own edification, but certainly in terms of jobs.
Yeah, well, especially for education, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or just like the scientific method has been lost.
Yeah.
And I think, and Ricklyn, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think also you said that you were like a kind of a latter-day student, right? You came to at least finish some of your education in a formal way later on in life. And I think you realize frequently when you've kind of gone through the ringer, or just had the experience of life that you do, that process is really important, and that understanding what you're getting into, there's real value with that, where I think sometimes we don't instill that within our students. And I think that's also just a product of youth anyway, not understand the value and importance of what you're looking at and what you're doing and why you're doing it. I think that Ricklyn probably, and again, now I'm putting words in your mouth, Ricklyn, but I think, again, just knowing you, but then also coming to finish your, some education, getting certified, and doing so many different things with your career later on, that probably, I would imagine, kind of pushed you forward into some of those processes and methods that you cultivated.
Absolutely. And I'm really big on being strategic and having a game plan. And I raised two boys who are both college graduates, and though college was important and it really wasn't much of an option for them, I was very clear with them, like, you're not going to get the degree so you can get the good job. Because to me, we're often sold that dream, and that's not a reality. But what I said to them is, you want to get your education, get a degree. That's something no one will ever be able to take from you, and it will ensure that you have options. But I never promised them the quote unquote good job.
I love hearing somebody. Sense. Yeah, it makes total sense. I love hearing somebody give a college student or a heading into college student that perspective, because too often they come in with that thought that, okay, I'm going to go to school for 4 years. I'm going to get this degree, and then I'm going to step out the door, and all these jobs are just going to fly in at me, and I will be at the top of my game. And so many still believe that. And it's hard to shake that thought out. And it's harder when 6 months after they graduate, they call you back and say, I still don't have a job. What do I do? Yeah.
Right. And when I was at University of Phoenix as a career advisor, that's when it really opened my eyes to the fact that people go to school, with an expectation of a particular outcome. But probably the most eye-opening thing for me is I would talk to people who were about to graduate, and they had no way to articulate what they had learned over the past 4 years and how to apply it in the workplace. So many of us, we focus on the end goal, which is the piece of paper, but not really being present with your coursework and understanding how you're going to articulate the skills and experience that you learn while being a student and apply that to the workplace. That's probably the biggest gap, even from a job market perspective, where people can say, hey, I've got the MBA, I've got the bachelor's in whatever. But then if you ask them, okay, so what does that mean and what can you do for me? They're like, I don't know. I just got the degree.
No, exactly. You hit it right on the head. And again, now they're sitting there without college support, trying to figure out what's my next move. I can only imagine how frightening and upsetting it is, but that's what we're turning out. So in your profession, when they come to you, when you're working with somebody in an HR kind of setting, how do you approach them? How do you approach a new college grad?
You know what? It's really about getting them to reflect on their college experience. What I do find is asking the right questions. I take them back. Let's look at your curriculum. What classes did you take? Even if you can't remember everything you've learned in school, but let's go class by class. And why did you choose that class over another class? Like really helping them to put their education in context. I actually just had a conversation with someone recently who had gotten an MBA. And on their resume, it said, MBA. Okay, but what does that mean? Every institution has different curriculum for their MBA program. What specific courses did you take? And what did you learn from those courses? And he was like, I had never even given any thought to that. So it's really just asking them the right questions. Now, again, this is hindsight after the fact.
Right.
I think we have a huge opportunity. And Joe, I think this is where Middletree really can come in and make an impact, to start having these career conversations earlier. even as early as elementary school. Not the proverbial, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Right.
Not necessarily that question, but really having some conversations around the skills that are going to be needed, whether you're 10, 20, 30, or 40. And we are really seeing a gap right now, which this won't come as a surprise to you, around problem solving, communication, critical thinking. I have a 25-year-old, and I looked at him like, where is your critical thinking skill?
Oh, dear. Yeah.
And I'm his mother. But it's just the reality. Joe, you talked about technology, and that's playing a huge part in some of the distraction and the inability to process and think things through. Now we've got Chat GPT and AI to where I really don't have to come up with my own ideas. I can prompt AI and I can get all the ideas I need. So it's kind of a double-edged sword there, having access to that technology, but that's where the gap is coming in. And I do think there's a way to have the best of both worlds, but we've got to have the right programming in place that's covering from all angles.
Yeah, and kind of when you say that maybe we need to get to students earlier on, but not necessarily, talk to them about what do they want to do? Well, because you ask bunch of third graders, what do you want to do? 90% of them will say, we want to be a fireman, or maybe 90% of them now say, I want to be an influencer. I don't know.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, dear. That's a whole nother conversation.
But you know what I'm getting at, right? It's astronaut, it's fireman, it's whatever my, mom and dad do or whatever. But I think the question we need to ask students, just in general, is what problems do you want to solve? What do you want to change in the world? What do you love? What are you passionate about? But I think if you start with what are the problems that you want to focus on, then that opens up students' thinking in a different way than what do you want to do? Because you ask them, what do you want to solve? Because that will kind of elucidate sort of what they are passionate about. And it frames it in a different way for not only students, but for we as the people who are facilitating that question and the education itself for, what problems are out there that need solving, and what is it that the next generation is viewing as problematic. So I think it just frames the conversation in a totally different way, and an important way.
Yes, and if I can add to that, Joe, why that's really important. A lot of times when you ask, not just children, when you ask adults about their career interests, people tend to give the politically correct answer. I want to be a teacher, a lawyer, or, something that's going to be approved by my family and the people around me. But when you talk about solving problems, that's when you give people permission to be creative and maybe come up with that thing that's really been brewing inside of them that they're curious about, that may not align with a traditional job, but having those conversations and sparking those ideas. And it's really about, again, giving them permission to dream and to be curious and to explore things, even if no one knows how they're going to actually be able to do it.
Even if you frame it, or even if you say, well, I personally, I'm a musician. I love playing music. Well, why do you love that? What is it that satisfies? Well, you kind of touch people's souls in a way. And it's something that you can create and then others can relate to. And then so it frames it in a different way when you say, well, what do you want to solve for? What is it that's out there that you see as a gap in your own life and in the world that you think we need more of? And how can you contribute to that? And those are the kinds of things that we don't, within the constructs of our educational system, those are the kinds of things we don't really ask about, look to fill, solve for, get our students thinking about enough. And there might be a teacher out there who, has, something that her students do or his students do so far as looking at that, but systematically in the dregs of the education system itself, that's not something we're concerned with.
Well, Joe, you said one of my favorite words, and I talk to my students all the time about it, and that's word passion. A job is a job. And I see students who are going into a career because they were told that would be a very stable career, like a business career. And when you sit down, a student say, well, what do you want to do with that? What do you want to do in business? I don't know. I don't even like business. And then you say, well, what's your passion? Forget about what everybody else has said. What is your passion? And sometimes they come up with very serious things. I want to build buildings. Well, why aren't you over in the architecture school there? Well, because they said it wasn't stable. And he said, well, who told you that? Well, my parents. I said, what do they know about architecture? And, well, I don't think anything. There you go. So they're not following their passion because their passion has been kind of shoved into a closet primarily because the people talking to them don't know about that industry, and they just go on what they think or what they've heard or what they've assumed or anything. And the passion is the thing. You don't want a job that you're going to hate the rest of your life. You want a job that fires you up. I see this so often. Makes me crazy.
Yeah, it might be something that, individual teachers are certainly trying to suss out, but it's not something that the whole system is concerned with necessarily.
Right.
The system is concerned with downloading information onto students. It's not concerned with evoking the passion. Mm-hmm. It's not concerned with identifying real life problems and telling students that they're potentially empowered to solve those issues.
Mm-hmm. Ricklyn, when you were a career advisor, did you have students coming in with realistic plans, or could you tell when they were manufactured plans because somebody told them that's the way to go?
Most of them were manufactured. And I will add too, because I was at University of Phoenix, which is a non-traditional school, so many were adults who had been already working and they decided to go back to school, and they went this route to try to make more money, etc. And there would be many who would come to me and say, well, I got my bachelor's degree. I don't have any job prospects. Should I go into a master's program?
Oh, yes.
My answer was more often than not, no. If you haven't been able to, quote unquote, make this bachelor's degree work for you, why then would you go into more debt and spend more time getting a master's degree? Now, I do think there is a place for a master's degree. I'll use myself as an example. I had already been working 15 years in my career by the time I got my bachelor's degree. So I had a very clear path, and I knew what types of doors the master's would open. So I don't recommend a master's when you don't know where you're headed. But if you have a very clear path and doorway to entry, then that master's very well could be the differentiator between $10,000, $20,000 from a salary perspective. And I did land roles shortly after I got my master's where they literally told me, here's the range, but since you have a master's, we're going to offer you this. But it's about being strategic. There is no guarantee. And you really have to know where you're headed to be able to take that kind of a gamble on pursuing a master's degree, in my opinion.
I think that that's right, in that a lot of students today, and I mean, confessionally, you also mentioned it, Tammy, that a lot of students just want to keep going to school because they have no idea what's next, or they want to be students continually. I was kind of in that camp for a minute when I, facing graduations, like, well, I kind of like this whole student thing, so maybe I'll keep doing that.
Well, it's scary. It's scary to jump out there.
It is scary. Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And that's a way to just sort of stave off the reality, right? But I at least personally was able to identify that passion that I had and parlay that into, something useful within my own life, career, and education all bundled into one. So I was fortunate, but I do think that Ricklyn's correct in saying that a lot of students feel like either, and this is, I think, an indictment on the education system, higher ed at large right now, and its relationship to the world, is that I think that a lot of students feel that their undergrad degree, or they're getting the sense that their undergrad degree is really not worth what they thought it might be. And so in order to really get ahead or have something that truly sets them apart on a resume, you do need that master's. And we look at a lot of resumes, as Ricklyn can tell you here. Not a lot of them have the master's degrees on them for the jobs that we're looking at necessarily. But I'm thinking that, a lot of other positions out there, that's become the new bachelor's degree, that master's. So that next step, that next level. The bachelor's degree has become so generalized, the master's gets much more specified and hones in. And I think this is also what Ricklyn's talking about, is she was, had been working for a while, knew what she wanted to do, was already doing it with her life, and then focused her education, more squarely on that, and was able to get ahead because of it.
Ricklyn, how does somebody who's in college or preparing for college, How do they decide if a master's is appropriate for where they're trying to go?
I think it depends on the field. So for an example, it depends on the field, and there is this reality. Society is set up the way that it's set up until things change. So social work, for example, it is a widely known fact that if you don't obtain a master's degree, you're probably not going to make very much money in social work. A friend of mine is entry level doing social work for the county and making like $20 an hour to do very hard work, picking up children from homes, taking them to foster care, like really like traumatizing things she's doing for $20 an hour. But in order for her to make more money, she's going to have to get a master's degree and might need to get a licensed clinical social worker certification to be able to really make a decent living. So certain industries, because of the way society is set up, you're not going to go very far without a master's degree. It just depends on the industry.
You bring up a fantastic point, though. And my husband is a perfect example of that. Years ago, he decided that he wanted to be a paramedic. And he went through the entire paramedic training and the hospital kind of experiences and all that, only to get out of all of this training, all of this work, to find out at that point in time, he'd be making about $10 an hour. That's
crazy to me.
Yeah, he had no idea, though. He thought, well, paramedic, you're out saving lives. That's got to pay you a whole bunch of money. And this was about 25 some years ago. But it just on the face of it, that looks like a serious, important job. So it's got to have a serious, important salary. And he found out, oh my gosh, I can't even live on that. So there is so much research that really needs to go into it to realize what does it really yield.
Yes, and that's the work that this is where I think our education system, for as much as education is costing, they're really missing things. When I was at University of Phoenix, we didn't require students to go through any type of career advising. It was like optional.
Oh, boy.
And most didn't even pursue a meeting with a career advisor until they were about to graduate or had already graduated. And one of the things I was advocating for was how do we include this in the curriculum throughout their program.
Right.
Before someone even enrolls, I think they should have to have a meeting with the career advisors to make sure, one, you're choosing the best possible major. Sure, you might change along the way, but at least you're having some deep discussions with someone and not just an academic advisor, because I think an academic advisor, sometimes their focus is really on the curriculum, whereas a career advisor typically is going to bring in that outside perspective of the labor market and really help an individual try to make as a well-informed decision as possible in choosing their major and putting together a plan for how they're going to approach every class they take in relationship to the job they hope to get when they're said and done. But that requires like really there's a term they use in healthcare, like a coordination of care. Like I think there's a gap in the support that students get, even starting in elementary school through college graduation, to help people stay on the path or adjust their path when they need to.
I mean, these are huge decisions, and sometimes I think people feel kind of unqualified to really make those decisions. And it's sad that there are career advisors there on campuses and the students aren't taking advantage of it. How in the world can that be changed? Because you're sitting there saying, doors open, come in.
It needs to be part of the curriculum. Like it needs to be mandated that you have to sit with a career advisor before your program starts. There needs to be checkpoints throughout. We need to hire more career advisors. For the number of students that University of Phoenix had, and I'm sure it's similar for other institutions, you have a very small population of actual career advisors.
Right.
So it's again, I'm going to put that on the educational institution where they investing their dollars. We didn't have the budget for more career advisors, though we needed them. We had more academic advisors or people to kind of sell you on the institution and bring you in, but we didn't have the staff to come alongside you on that journey.
I'm a super big advocate of internships. And I know when I was in college, you did an internship or you didn't graduate. And now I'm finding out internships are optional at so many places. What are your thoughts on internships?
It's kind of a double-edged sword because then you get into some of the regulations around hiring interns and how that may work depending on what state that you're in. So I think a lot of organizations, they shy away from having interns just because of the potential legal exposure if they're not managing those programs correctly. So from an HR lens, I kind of understand why they've taken them aside, but I do think that there could be value in them internships or volunteering for sure. It's a great way to get experience and exposure.
Well, also to test the industry, get into it and see if you like it or not once you're actually in it, not looking at it from the outside, because things are so much different when you go to a company that does what you think you want to do.
Right.
Now you find out, do I want to do it or not? Now you find out what it really actually is. And
definitely.
Yeah, that can be eye-opening. And I've had students do internships and come back and say, I need to make a switch. I don't want to do that. So
that happens a lot.
So, Ricklyn, we were talking kind of in a previous conversation about there seems to be a dearth of new educators that are willing to kind of come into education because there's so many other options. Do you have any, like, just from an HR perspective, like job market perspective, do you have an inkling about what the future of education is so far as where it stands competitively, like in the job market? And because again, I think that especially young people feel like they have so many different options. I think that people, especially young ones, feel like education isn't maybe the most exciting thing that they could do. It's certainly not held in the esteem that it once was. Do you have any feeling for where the broader scope of and field of education kind of ranks within the pantheon of all the other options that people have? And can you kind of speak about some of those other options that especially young people are gravitating towards and kind of what that looks like and what that all means for all of us?
Very good question. Well, I will tell you, I know we just hit kind of the fifth year of experiencing COVID, but going through COVID and homeschooling and teaching remotely, it seems like that whole era that we were in totally shifted the way people look at education from a career perspective. Education has always been underpaid for the work that they do. I mean, I've even looked at my own career as an HR professional making significantly more than educators do, and even feeling like that's kind of not fair, making significantly more than our law enforcement. That continues to be a problem. Education institutions are not paying educators to, even though they might be passionate about educating, they still have a family to support and a life to lead. And so if they're not feeling fairly and equitably compensated, they're going to look for other avenues, especially with technology. There are educators who have left education to start their own tutoring and education companies, making more than the school system was paying them. And then not just in terms of teacher salary, but this generation of children it's a lot different working with them. And I've heard some educators complaining about technology, complaining about distraction, students not being able to focus. So it's less attractive of an industry than it was at one point in time. And unless and until, and this is just my opinion, I don't have any data to support it, just from conversations that I've had, unless and until the education system makes the necessary changes, one, for teachers to feel more valued, and for curriculum to be adjusted to where it's more meaningful to students and relevant to students of today's time, incorporating technology, incorporating, like Joe mentioned, the conversations that are meaningful and interesting to students, people are not going to want to do this work.
And the problem is that this is this giant, when we talk about the education system, period, what we're really talking about is basically the largest, most lethargic, arguably most archaic body of government or arm or branch of as a government institution. And as I think we are all aware of, government institutions aren't necessarily at the cutting edge of fill in the blank, right? Nor are they the most adaptable, nor are they the most flexible in general. So they are slow to change, difficult to change, bureaucratic beyond bureaucracy, or whatever those lines of bureaucracy are. Bureaucracy within education goes beyond it. I think it was Woodrow Wilson who believe he was like the dean or provost of Princeton. He was the governor of New Jersey. And of course, he was the president of the United States. And he said of all three, by far the most politics were at Princeton. And so the bureaucracy and the difficulty, I might be paraphrasing that, but it's something like, but the bureaucracy within the education system, I think, is almost like this invincible force. I think this is where it scares me too, to think about the lack of potential response that is needed by the education system to really fully adjust to the extraordinarily fast-paced evolution of what it is to be a human being.
It's the one-size-fits-all approach to education that's extremely problematic. Like now we're hearing about the term neurodivergence, which basically, if you simplify it, people whose brain operates and processes information differently. Well, we're all neurodivergent to some degree, for that matter, because everybody approaches life differently and through a different lens. But even for myself, I was actually a high school dropout. I left school in the 11th grade and I got a GED, and people asked me why I left school. And I was like, I kind of outgrew it. I was definitely academically inclined, but I was bored with the curriculum. It did not interest me in any way, shape, or form. And I don't know if I'll ever see that change in my lifetime, because it's, to your point, Joe, the system operates the way it does for a very specific reason. And so to try to customize education to the needs of each person is probably going to be a huge, huge undertaking. But I just had a conversation with someone on Monday who took her kids out of the public school system. She's homeschooling them. They went to the zoo on Sunday, turned that into a lesson. They did gardening, turned that into a lesson. She's not using traditional curriculum. She's meeting each of her children where they are and utilizing the things that they're interested in to teach them. Our system can't do that.
But again, because we have this giant system in place and the system operates the way the system operates, it's not concerned with the individual necessarily. Mm-hmm. The system is operating within the parameters that it is set up to operate within. And I shouldn't even say it's not concerned with the individual. It can't.
Right.
It's not set up to do that. So that's the problem. That's, some of the advantages that you have with homeschooling. Then again, there are a lot of disadvantages, most of which have to do with socialization and confronting issues and real world, real life happenings where other people are not your parents and not all loving and not thinking, that they're all wonderful and can do no wrong. Most parents, I think have a pretty good grasp on the limitations, of their students.
Such a big problem to solve, huh? Now that we're talking about it, Joe, are you sure you want to be solving these education problems?
Somebody's got to do it, right? As they say. Ricklyn, talking to somebody who's in college right now, what good tips would you have for them as they prepare to start meeting people like you in HR departments? What should they think about? What should they prepare? How should they act? What are some good tips?
I love that question. And the number one thing I would tell anybody is focus on skill development. People don't realize or maybe don't think about, like, when you're in school, that is academic experience. So whatever projects you're working on, assignments you're working on, skill articulation is really what it's called. Everybody should leave school with a binder of sorts, whether digital or a notebook. Like, what skill did you take away from that course, that project? The key is going to be able to articulate what skill you learned and how that skill will solve the problems of the organizations that you're looking to join. That's really it. That would be the one and only thing I would tell folks. We are seeing a shift in the workplace where many organizations are moving away from requiring a degree. And in part, they're doing that because they realize a degree does not equate to skills oftentimes. So I'm not saying don't get a degree, but definitely understand how to use your educational experience to round out having the degree. You've got to be able to say more than I have a degree. You have to be able to say, I have a degree and here's what I learned while getting the degree.
I am so in favor of what you said, but I think one of the keys is what can you do for the organization? Be able to articulate that as opposed to what is the organization going to do for me?
Absolutely.
Yeah, boy. Some key points. Ricklyn, thank you so much for being on the show.
This has been fun.
Yeah. Well, we invite you
I love
back.
talking about this stuff.
It's important and it doesn't get talked about enough, and that we're going to try to change that. So we invite you back anytime.
Awesome. I'd love to come back. Thank you for having me.
Yep. And Joe, I know Ricklyn left a lasting impression on Middle Tree and, helped Middle Tree be what it is today. So that's kind of a neat connection.
She certainly did. That's never going to be forgotten. And Ricklyn continues to be impactful on us. We continue to turn to her for a lot of advice and to navigate us through situations. And she's been so good about doing that. And I think we'll be working with Ricklyn for a long time to come. So.
And we'll hear her back on the
Thank you.
podcast. Ricklyn Woods.
That's the hope.
She is a certified HR professional, worked with Middle Tree, and just some incredible information today. Whether you're just getting started in your career or you're already in a career looking to make a change, hope we helped you out because, I loved a lot of the things that came out of today's episode.
Thank you for listening to Educate Everyone with Dr. Joseph Atman and Tammy Trujillo. Join us each week as we explore the inner workings of our own minds and the educational system which builds and supports it. Also, check out our website at middletree.org to see what opportunities Middle Tree's programs can offer you or your student. And join us on social media. If you have any questions you'd like Dr. Atman to answer, please leave them on a post or send us a message, and you may hear them answered on the next episode of Educate Everyone. Until then, thanks for tuning in.